There was a time when silence in front of a microphone was the most powerful answer a person could give, when refusing to speak meant something the loudest words never could. What happened to Catherine Mercer on Family Feud last? Spring will completely change the way you think about courage, marriage, and the kind of strength that hides behind a closed mouth. When Steve Harvey watched a 6-year-old woman stand at the Fast Money podium and refused to answer his question, he did not get angry. He did not rush her. He did not move on. Instead, he did something he had never done in over a decade of hosting. He set down the cards in his hand, he walked across the stage, and he asked her one question that nobody in that studio saw coming. A question that would unlock a story she had been holding inside her chest for almost 30 years. Catherine Mercer had not planned to go silent. She had walked onto that stage that morning with every intention of playing the game, smiling for the cameras, and going home with whatever prize money she could win. But when Steve Harvey read the final Fast Money question out loud, something inside Catherine simply stopped working. Her mouth would not open. Her voice would not come, and the more the clock ticked, the more she realized she could not give the answer they were waiting for. Because the real answer to that question, the honest answer, was the one truth she had spent her entire adult life refusing to say out loud. And what Steve Harvey did when he saw her standing there in silence is the reason this story is being shared on every screen in America tonight. Catherine Mercer was 56 years old. For 31 years, she had worked as a hospice nurse at a small county hospital in western Pennsylvania. She was the kind of nurse families requested by name when their loved ones entered the final stages of life. She had sat at the bedside of over 400 dying men and women across her career, holding their hands, wiping their faces, singing softly to them when their own families could not bring themselves to be in the room. The doctors at her hospital used to say that Catherine Mercer was the gentlest pair of hands in the entire county. They said she had a gift. They said she could make a dying person feel at peace just by walking into the room. Catherine's mother, Ruth, had been a coal miner's daughter from a small town in West Virginia. Ruth had raised 5 children alone after her husband died in a mine collapse in 1968. She had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, and she had taught all 5 of her children the same lesson on the same kitchen chair every Sunday evening. "Honey," she would say, holding their faces between her tired, calloused hands. "You take care of people. That is the whole job. The world is full of folks who think their job is to make money or to be important, but the only real work in this life is taking care of people who cannot take care of themselves. You remember that?" Catherine never forgot those words. She carried them through nursing school. She carried them through 31 years at the hospice. She carried them through every single shift, every single hand she held, every single goodbye she helped a family say. Catherine had married her husband, Thomas Mercer, in 1992. Thomas had been a long-haul truck driver. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a deep voice and a slow, careful smile. They had met at a small church social when Catherine was 23 years old, and they had married 6 months later. To everyone who knew them on the outside, the Mercers were a quiet, steady, hard-working couple. They had raised one daughter, Emma, in a small 2-story house on a tree-lined street. They went to church every Sunday. They paid their taxes. They waved at their neighbors. They never raised their voices in public. From the outside, the Mercer family looked like the kind of family the rest of the country tries to be. But Catherine Mercer had a secret she had been carrying, for almost 3 decades. A secret nobody in her town knew. Not her closest friends at the hospital, not her own daughter, not even her own pastor. Thomas Mercer was not the man everyone thought he was. Behind the closed door of their small 2-story house, Thomas had been quietly cruel to Catherine for years. He had never hit her. He was too careful for that. He had never raised his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. He was too smart for that. But for almost 3 decades, he had told her every single day that she was nothing without him. He had controlled the money. He had controlled the friendships. He had controlled the conversations. And Catherine, who could sit at the bedside of a dying stranger and bring them peace, had never been able to bring peace to her own home. 2 years before this Family Feud taping, Thomas Mercer had passed away from a sudden heart attack at age 61. Catherine had nursed him through the final days the same way she had nursed strangers for 31 years. She had held his hand. She had wiped his face. She had sung softly to him when nobody else was in the room. And when he passed, she had grieved him publicly the way a wife is supposed to grieve her husband. The whole town had come to the funeral. People had said the kindest things. They had called Thomas a good man. They had called the Mercers a model couple, and Catherine had stood in the front pew in her black dress and accepted every kind word without saying much in return. Because the truth she had been carrying for almost 30 years had not died with Thomas. It had simply gone quiet inside her chest, where it had been living all along. The Family Feud appearance had been her daughter Emma's idea. Emma was now 29 years old, a teacher at the same high school Catherine had once attended. Emma had told her mother that the family needed something to laugh about. She had told her that 2 years was long enough to mourn. She had told her it was time to do something fun, something silly, something that would put a smile back on her mother's face. Catherine had agreed without much argument. She had been agreeing with people her whole life. That was what she did. That was the shape her life had taken. So she had put on the green blouse Emma had picked out for her, and she had practiced answering simple questions in front of the bathroom mirror. And she had told herself that this would be a fun memory for the family. What she did not know, what Emma did not know, what nobody could have known, was that something inside Catherine Mercer was about to give way under those bright studio lights. After 3 decades of holding her tongue, she was about to discover that there was one question in this world she could no longer answer with a lie. The Mercer family arrived at the studio at 6 in the morning. Catherine wore the soft green blouse Emma had picked out for her, along with a small silver locket her mother had given her on her wedding day in 1992. The locket had a tiny photograph of Ruth inside it. Catherine had not opened the locket in years, but that morning, sitting at her vanity in the dim light, she had clicked it open and looked at her mother's face for a long minute. She had needed Ruth with her today. She did not know exactly why. She just knew she needed her mother in the room. The other family that morning was the Sullivan family, from Boston, a loud, energetic, 6-person team who immediately took over the green room with their jokes and their stories. Catherine was uncomfortable in groups of strangers. She had always been quiet, but Emma had pulled her into the conversation, and within 10 minutes, Catherine was actually laughing at something one of the Sullivan brothers had said. Emma watched her mother from across the room. She had not seen her mother laugh like that in 2 years, maybe longer, maybe much longer. Emma felt her throat tighten. She blinked twice and turned away, because she did not want her mother to see her cry or something that should have been happy. The main game started off slow. Catherine was clearly nervous. She missed the first question, an easy one about things you find on a beach. Emma picked up the slack with 2 strong answers in the second round. By the third round, Catherine had loosened up a little. She was even smiling, the kind of small, careful smile that had not come easy to her face for a very long time. Steve Harvey had picked up on Catherine's quiet energy quickly. He was not making the kind of loud jokes he usually made. He was treating her with the gentle respect a host gives an older contestant who is clearly carrying something heavy underneath the polite smile. By the time Fast Money came around, the Mercer family was ahead by 165 points. They had won the main game. The producers chose Catherine and Emma to play Fast Money together. Emma went first. She gave fast, smart answers and walked off the stage with 152 points. Catherine only needed 48 points to win the $20,000 prize. She stepped up to the podium and felt the weight of every single one of her 56 years pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about her mother, Ruth. She thought about the locket around her neck. She thought about her daughter. Watching her from off stage with that hopeful look on her face, she took a deep breath. She gripped the podium with both hands, and she nodded to Steve to start the clock. Steve looked at her for a long moment before nodding to the producers. He had picked up on something in her face. He could see her hands trembling. He could feel the air in the studio shift, just slightly, the way the air shifts before a storm. The clock started. The first question came fast. Name something you do every morning before breakfast. Catherine said, brush my teeth. Steve nodded. Name something a husband leaves around the house. Catherine paused for a beat. Then she said in a slightly cracked voice, socks. There was a small laugh from the audience. Steve smiled, but his eyes did not leave Catherine's face. The third question came. Name a place where people go to relax. Catherine said the beach. Steve kept moving, but his pace was slower now. He could see something happening to her in real time. The fourth question came. Name something a person feels when they finally tell the truth. This was the question that began to break her open. Catherine hesitated 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 6 seconds. The clock kept ticking, her eyes filled with tears. Steve waited. He did not rush her. And then Catherine said in a voice so quiet the microphone almost did not pick it up. Free, she got the answer out, but her voice cracked on the word. The audience went still. Steve nodded once, slowly. He could feel something coming. He could feel the entire studio going quiet around him. The fifth and final question came. Steve looked at her for a long moment before he read it. He almost did not want to ask it, but he had to. The producers were watching. The cameras were rolling. The clock was ticking. He took a breath and read the card out loud. Last question, Catherine, name the best thing about being married. The clock kept ticking. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 8 seconds, 10 seconds. Catherine did not move. She did not speak. She did not even look at the clock. She just stood there at the podium, both hands gripping the edges of it, her jaw locked tight. Her eyes locked on something far away that nobody else in the studio could see. The buzzer sounded. The clock ran out. Catherine had not given an answer. She had simply refused to speak. The audience went completely silent. Emma, watching from offstage, took a step forward, like she wanted to run to her mother but did not know if she should. Steve Harvey did not move. He did not smile. He did not nod. He did not crack a joke to break the tension. He just stood there, looking at Catherine, the way a son might look at his own mother when he sees her cry for the first time in his life. Say, the producers in the booth were waving frantically at him to read the answers, to keep the show moving, to follow the script. But Steve was not looking at them. He was looking at Catherine, and Catherine was looking at the floor, her shoulders gently shaking, refusing to give the answer the show was waiting for. For nearly 30 seconds, nothing happened on that stage. The cameras kept rolling. The audience held its breath. Finally, Steve cleared his throat. He looked down at the cards in his hand. And then, in a quiet, deliberate motion, he set the cards down on the small table beside him. He took the microphone in both hands, and he started walking across the stage toward Catherine. The audience could see Steve was about to say something. They did not know what. The producers did not know what. Catherine did not know what. And what came out of Steve Harvey's mouth next was the question nobody in that studio saw coming. Steve Harvey reached the podium. He stood next to Catherine. He was close enough now that the audience could no longer see her face clearly. He looked at her for a moment, and then, in a low, gentle voice that the microphone barely picked up, he asked her one question. He did not ask her the fast money question again. He did not ask her why she had refused to answer. He did not ask her if she was okay. Instead, he asked her something nobody in the studio had expected. He said, "Ma'am, who told you that you weren't allowed to have a good answer to that question?" Catherine looked up at him. Her eyes were full of tears. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Steve waited. He did not rush her. He just stood there, with one hand resting gently on the podium next to hers, the way a man stands next to a woman at a graveside. And finally, after a long, long silence, Catherine Mercer spoke. Her voice was quiet. Her voice was shaking, but her voice was clear. "My husband," she said. "My husband told me, for 30 years. She paused. She took a breath. "He told me that I was not allowed to think anything good about being married. He told me I was lucky he had married me at all. He told me that if I ever said anything good about our marriage in public, people would know I was lying, because he had told me too many times in private that I was not worth being married to." The studio went completely silent. Emma, watching from off stage, put both hands over her mouth. Steve Harvey did not move. He did not say anything. He just nodded slowly, once, the way you nod at somebody when you finally understand something. Catherine kept going. The words were coming out of her now, one after the other, after 30 years of being held inside her chest. "He never hit me. He never yelled at me where the neighbors could hear. He was too careful for that. But for almost 30 years, every single day, he told me I was nothing. He told me I was lucky. He told me I should be grateful. And I believed him. I believed him for 30 years. I believed him so much that even now, 2 years after he passed, I still couldn't open my mouth to say one good thing about him being married, because his voice in my head told me I wasn't allowed to." Steve Harvey closed his eyes. He took a long, slow breath. When he opened his eyes again, they were full of tears. He turned to face the audience. The audience was completely still. Some of them were crying openly. An older woman in the third row had both hands pressed against her face. A man in the back was holding his wife's hand so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Steve picked up the microphone and addressed the entire studio. "Folks," he said, his voice cracking, "I have been doing this show for a long time. I have heard a lot of answers at this podium, but I just heard the realest non-answer I have ever heard in my life. This woman didn't refuse to answer my question because she didn't know what to say. She refused to answer because somebody spent 30 years telling her she wasn't allowed to. You to Catherine Mercer, Pennsylvania. There were tens of thousands of them within the first month. Many of them were from women who had been in similar marriages. Many of them were from women who were still in similar marriages. Many of them just had one short sentence written inside the card. Thank you for refusing to answer. I needed to hear somebody say no out loud. Steve Harvey kept his promise. The week after the taping, he had his foundation team reach out to Catherine personally. They did not just send a check. They connected her with a counselor who specialized in long-term emotional recovery. They paid for a full year of therapy. They covered the cost of a small writing retreat in North Carolina that Catherine had quietly dreamed about for over 20 years but had never let herself attend. Catherine went to the retreat for 2 weeks the following autumn. She spent her mornings walking on the beach. She spent her afternoons writing in a small notebook for the first time in her adult life. The notebook was filled with all the answers to all the questions she had spent 30 years refusing to answer. By the end of the 2 weeks, the notebook was completely full. 6 months after the episode aired, the Family Feud team did something the show had never done before. They sent a small camera crew to a small church hall in western Pennsylvania for a follow-up segment. Catherine had started a quiet support group at her church for women who had been through the same kind of marriage she had been through. The group met every Tuesday evening. It had started with 3 women. By the time the follow-up aired, it had over 40 members, with women driving in from 4 different counties. The group did not have a fancy name. They simply called it the Permission Group, because that was the only thing it took, Catherine said. One person in your life giving you permission to finally answer the question. Emma, with her mother's quiet support, helped Catherine start a small foundation called The Honest Answer. It provided counseling resources, legal support, and emergency assistance to women in long-term, emotionally abusive marriages, especially older women who felt they had stayed too long to leave. The first year, the foundation helped 22 women. By the third year, it had grown to over 700 women across 9 states. Steve Harvey's foundation eventually partnered with The Honest Answer to expand its reach. And Catherine became an unlikely public speaker, traveling to small churches and community centers across the country. Talk about her 30 years of silence and the one moment in front of a microphone when she had finally been allowed to refuse. Steve Harvey visited Catherine's home once, quietly, on his way through Pennsylvania. There were no cameras. There was no announcement. He sat at her kitchen table for nearly 2 hours, drinking coffee and listening more than he talked. Before he left, Catherine walked him out to his car. The two of them stood in the driveway for a long minute without speaking. Finally, Catherine said, "Mr. Harvey, I do not know how to thank you for what you did. I have been trying for 6 months to find the words. I cannot find them." Steve shook his head. "Ma'am," he said, "you do not owe me a thing. I just asked you a question. You are the one who answered it. The hard part was on you, not on me. All I did was hand you the microphone." He paused. "But ma'am, can I ask you something? Are you free now?" Catherine thought about it for a long moment, her eyes filled with tears. And then she smiled, the kind of small, real smile that Steve had not seen on her face the day of the taping. "Yes," she said, "for the first time in my life, yes." In a later television interview, Steve was asked what made him ask Catherine that particular question on stage. He thought about it for a long time before he answered. "I'll tell you the truth," he said. "When that lady refused to answer my question, my first instinct was to fill the silence. Tell a joke, move on. That is what hosts do. We do not let the silence sit. But something stopped me that day. I looked at her face and I realized she was not refusing to answer because she did not know what to say. She was refusing because somebody had told her a long time ago that she was not allowed to. And I have known women like that my whole life. My own mama had friends like that, women who had been quieted by men who were supposed to love them. And I figured, you know what? The only question worth asking a woman like that is who quieted her in the first place. Because once you ask that question out loud, the answer comes. It always does. It just needs somebody to ask. Catherine, when asked what she would say to the millions of women who had written to her after the episode aired, gave a simple answer. She was sitting on the front porch of her small house, with her mother's silver locket around her neck, the one she now wore every single day. She said, "If you have spent years refusing to answer the question, please know that you are not the only one. There are more of us than the world wants to admit. We are sitting in church pews. We are working at the grocery store. We are nursing the dying. We are smiling at our neighbors, and we are silent. Almost all of us are silent. But silence is not the answer. Silence is just the question being asked of us by somebody who took our voice away. The real answer comes when somebody who loves you hands you the microphone back. And when they do, please, take it. Take the microphone and tell the truth, because the truth is the first piece of yourself you ever get back. Years later, Catherine Mercer was still leading the permission group at her small church in western Pennsylvania. The group had grown so large that they had to move to the main sanctuary to fit everyone. Women still drove in from 4 different counties every Tuesday evening. They sat in a wide circle. They drank weak church coffee out of paper cups. And one by one, when each woman was ready, they took a small wooden microphone Catherine had bought at a craft store and held it in their hands. They did not have to speak. They did not have to say anything at all. They could just hold the microphone for as long as they needed, because that was the whole point of the group, Catherine said. Sometimes the only thing a woman needs is to know she is finally allowed to hold the microphone. The words come later. They always come later. But somebody has to hand her the microphone first. Steve Harvey had handed Catherine hers in front of millions of people, and every Tuesday evening, in a small church hall in western Pennsylvania, Catherine Mercer quietly handed it forward. One woman at a time, one microphone at a time, one refusal at a time, until silence finally became something every woman in that room got to choose for herself.